I used to think the night shift was the safest place in the world. Down there, buried beneath concrete and silence, my only companions were the soft crackle of static and the steady pulse of blinking signal lights. In Unit 915, everything was routine. Every frequency was catalogued. Every signal had a source. Until that night. It started with a faint tick, then a low distortion, and suddenly, sharp and unmistakable, a burst of encrypted Morse code spilled out through the static. I froze. That frequency had been locked down years ago. I knew it by heart. It belonged to Base 77. But Base 77 was gone. The official report said it had been sealed after a chemical leak in 2013. No staff, no broadcasts, no mention in any of the current system logs. It didn't exist anymore. Yet someone was transmitting from there. I copied the 6-character code onto my notepad and stared at it for a long time. Then the signal vanished, as suddenly as it had come. I didn't tell anyone, but someone must have known I heard it. The next morning, my ID card failed at the security gate. My access to the classified channel logs was revoked without explanation. That night, my closest colleague didn't show up for duty. They said he'd been transferred, but no one would say where. I was never meant to be part of something like this. I was just a technician, a quiet man. I followed rules. I didn't ask questions. But that signal, it had pulled me into something much bigger. And now, I had a feeling someone out there was trying to erase me before I ever figured out what I'd really heard. I've always been the quiet one, the kind of man who follows orders, works the night shift, and prefers radio static over small talk. I wasn't born into privilege. My father was a factory mechanic who died when I was 17. My mother passed away the following winter. Somehow, I found purpose in frequencies, things that could be measured, decoded, understood. In a country where questions can get you disappeared, radio signals felt honest. I worked for Unit 915, a secure underground facility run by the Department of Military Telecommunications. My role was simple on paper: monitor encrypted frequencies, detect anomalies, and report anything unusual. In reality, it was long hours in a steel room with humming Soviet-era consoles and rows of dials. The air always smelled faintly of burnt wires. Most of my colleagues were older men, hardened and careful. I kept to myself. The party saw me as useful but invisible. I had no ambitions, no political leanings. My security file labeled me technically excellent and ideologically silent. That was a compliment. I lived in a restricted military complex, with reliable electricity and better food rations than most civilians. I ate alone, spoke little. I wasn't unhappy, just numb. My only real joy came at night, when I would tinker with a homemade shortwave receiver, built from discarded parts over the years. I didn't use it to spy. I just listened to foreign broadcasts, weather updates, sometimes music. It reminded me that somewhere, beyond the static, life existed differently. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't a traitor or a defector. I was just a technician. I did my job, respected the rules, and never asked questions. But the moment I heard that forbidden signal, something inside me shifted. It was like the walls around my world cracked, just enough to let doubt seep in. And once it was in, it didn't leave. Most days felt the same inside Unit 915. I would wake up to the buzz of the fluorescent lights flickering on above my bunk, eat a reheated meal of rice and preserved vegetables, and walk the short path to the bunker. Outside, everything was gray: concrete roads, dull fences, no trees. Inside, it was even quieter. The walls were padded to prevent echoes. The only voices I heard were from the radio waves I monitored. My life had rhythm. Even if it lacked color, I didn't mind. I told myself that predictability was safety. Each shift, I sat in front of a long console, filled with switches, knobs, and blinking green screens. I tracked frequencies, logged transmissions, and decrypted short bursts of code that mostly turned out to be standard Army logistics, fuel reports, movement orders, occasionally, a command from Pyongyang. I never asked questions. My job wasn't to know why, just to listen and to report. Sometimes, when the supervisor stepped away, I would quietly reach into my drawer and take out my homemade receiver. I had built it over years, salvaging discarded parts and tuning it for international bands. I knew I wasn't supposed to have it, but it was the only thing that made me feel connected to something beyond these walls. One night, I heard a weather forecast from China. Another time, a pop song from the South. It was brief, almost too fast to catch. But hearing that melody, even for a few seconds, made my hands shake. It reminded me that there was a world out there that didn't speak in code. I kept those moments to myself. No one at the base talked about escape or questioned orders. We all knew better. One joke in the wrong place could land you in a meeting with the security division. And not everyone came back from those meetings. So we kept our heads down. We worked. We endured. There were small comforts, though. I liked the quiet. I liked the way the static danced when the signal was just about to break. I had a favorite chair, worn in the corners but perfectly shaped to my back. I had a book of handwritten notes, filled with patterns and signal anomalies I'd tracked over the years, some of them from sources no one had ever been able to explain. Looking back now, I think I knew something was wrong long before the signal came. There were too many frequencies with gaps, too many logs quietly deleted, and every once in a while, I'd hear a pulse, just one beat, that didn't belong to any system I recognized. At the time, I ignored it, because it's easier to live in silence when you pretend there's nothing waiting behind it. At first, I told myself it was just a glitch. The signal from base 77 could have been interference, a test pattern, maybe even some old ghost frequency leaking through ancient wires. But then the anomalies started piling up. The day after I logged the transmission, my access to the central archives was restricted. Not completely revoked, just narrowed. A few folders I used to check daily were now password locked. I asked my section chief about it, but he just said, "System update. Nothing to worry about." His voice was flatter than usual, like he was reciting it. The following night, I went back to the frequency. Nothing. Just cold silence. I scanned higher, lower. I activated the directional antenna manually, an old method, but it was like the air itself had gone mute. 3 days later, Park didn't show up for duty. Park was my closest colleague, not a friend in the usual sense, but the only person who ever shared a cup of hot barley tea with me during break. He was sharp, sarcastic, and unafraid to mutter things under his breath that would have terrified me to even think. When I asked where he was, someone said he'd been reassigned. But the way they said it, there was no follow-up, no explanation. Just a void. That evening, while testing a relay system, I caught a voice. Not a code, not a machine. A voice low, desperate, crackling through static like it had to crawl its way through miles of dark air. It repeated the same message 3 times. Still here, not allowed to leave. Help. I froze. No call sign. No coordinates. But the tone, I recognized it. The rhythm matched the original signal from base 77. I didn't sleep that night. My thoughts circled like vultures. Why would anyone be broadcasting from a dead base? Why restrict my access after I heard it? Why did Park disappear? I went to the administration office the next morning, pretending to request a signal report for calibration. The officer behind the desk didn't even look up. He just handed me a blank form and said, "You're not assigned to that sector anymore." Something had shifted. Later that week, I received a routine reassignment notice transferring me to surface maintenance duty. That was unheard of. I was trained in signal intelligence, No one transfers a technician like me to cable inspections unless they're being sidelined or watched. And then, the final confirmation came. When I returned to my quarters, my private notebook, the one I kept hidden under a loose panel, was gone. In its place, neatly folded, was a single piece of paper. No writing, just a perfectly centered, stamped symbol. Security command. They didn't need to say anything else. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the silent receiver. The walls around me had always felt tight, but now they felt alive, breathing, listening. I realized then, it wasn't just about the signal. It was about what I knew now, what I had heard, what I could no longer unhear. And in that moment, a thought crept in, quiet, terrified, but clear. I needed to get out. I had never considered escape before. I knew what happened to people who tried. Public executions, family punishments, stories whispered and buried. I wasn't brave. I wasn't reckless. But now, I was afraid, in a way I'd never felt before, not of the border, but of staying. They were closing in. I started planning in fragments, during sleepless nights and stolen minutes. I knew the first rule: tell no one. Not a superior, not a colleague, not even the people I thought I could trust. Trust was a luxury. One wrong glance, one strange word, and I'd vanish before even getting near the fence. My first goal was to disappear from the system without making noise. I used my reassignment to surface duty as a shield. I volunteered for more exterior inspections, cable work near the perimeter fence, equipment checks in utility zones, tasks that let me move freely in daylight. It gave me space to observe the patrol routines, guard rotations, even where the shadows fell at different hours. Then I needed help, someone outside the military structure. I remembered an old acquaintance, a man named Kang, who had once been a supplier for our base's electrical equipment. We had spoken a few times during maintenance shifts, and I remembered how he'd once hinted, in a low voice, "People who want to disappear always find someone." I didn't answer him then, but now those words haunted me. Finding him was the riskiest move. I used one of the old internal lines during a shift and coded a simple message into a diagnostic report, an innocuous phrase we'd used years ago. 3 days later, a package arrived at the base, addressed to my name. Inside were 2 broken fuses and a folded napkin. On it, a time and a train station. That was my chance. I made preparations slowly. Over the next 2 weeks, I faked an illness, requested leave to visit my uncle in Chongjin. It wasn't uncommon for low-level personnel to take short leaves. They approved it, but I knew someone would be watching. I dressed plainly. I carried no electronics, just a small bag with dry food, 1 spare shirt, a false ID Kang had arranged, and an old military map from the Cold War era. The moment I stepped out of Unit 915, I felt the air shift. It was colder, raw. The world outside didn't feel freer. It felt heavier, as if every building had eyes. At the station, I waited. Kang arrived wearing civilian clothes and didn't greet me by name. He handed me a bottle of soju and said, "Your cousin asked me to bring this." I nodded. We boarded the same train. He sat 3 rows behind. Neither of us spoke. We traveled west, toward the mountains. Kang had arranged a vehicle near a fuel depot on the outskirts of Horyong. From there, we switched to foot. It was bitterly cold. The wind bit through my jacket. Each step into the forest felt like walking deeper into uncertainty. We slept one night in a shack once used by smugglers. The walls were thin, but the silence outside was thick. I asked him where the crossing point was. He didn't answer. He just said, "If we get split up, keep heading north until you smell fertilizer. That means you're near the farms. The fence is thinner there." That night, I barely slept. My mind repeated every mistake I might have made. The missing notebook, the request for transfer, the glance from the officer at the train station. I wondered if they were already coming, if they'd follow the footprints through the snow, if they'd kill Kang before he spoke. At dawn, we moved again. No roads, just trails and instinct. We reached the final stretch by late afternoon. A hill overlooking the Tumen River. Across it, China. Freedom. Or prison. Or worse. There was one last outpost. A small shack with a rusted antenna and a single soldier standing in front, smoking. We waited for the wind to shift. When he turned to stub out his cigarette, Kang signaled me with 2 fingers. We ran. I don't remember breathing. I only remember the sting in my legs, the sharp cut of wire, and the splash of freezing river water as we dove in. The current wasn't strong, but it was dark and full of silt. I kept my head low. My bag soaked instantly, weighing me down. Halfway across, I thought I saw a flashlight flicker on the bank, but I didn't look back. I swam harder, gasping, pulling myself through the mud until my hands gripped roots on the other side. Kang wasn't with me. I waited. 10 minutes, then 20. He never came out of that water. I don't know if he was caught, shot, or if he turned back. But I was alone, now shivering, soaked, lungs burning, in a country I had only known through static and rumor. China, for the first time in my life. No one was watching me. And that terrified me more than anything else. I had crossed the river. My feet sank into muddy soil. My lungs burned. My hands were scraped raw from gripping the frozen roots that lined the riverbank. But I had made it. On the other side, there were no searchlights, no fences, just the sound of distant dogs and the whisper of trees moving in the wind. I was in China. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just stood there, numb, waiting for something, anything to confirm that I was truly out. Kang was gone. I would never know what happened to him. But the thought of him didn't leave me as I stumbled through the woods for hours, hiding behind haystacks, climbing into abandoned sheds, praying no one would see my face or hear my accent. Eventually, a farmer found me covered in mud, shaking from cold, holding out my hands as if I had anything left to offer. He didn't speak. He just stared. I think he understood. He pointed me to a nearby town and handed me a torn scarf. That small act of mercy kept me alive. From there, I followed directions, whispered from one stranger to another. I moved at night, stayed hidden during the day. I learned quickly that not all who smiled were safe. Some helped for money. Others helped for reasons I still don't understand. But every step felt like walking into a new universe. The first time I saw a fully lit street at midnight, I stopped walking. I stood there, staring at the neon signs, blinking in red and yellow. In the north, even government buildings went dark after hours. Here, it was like electricity was endless. Pointless, even. It poured light into empty air. I spent a week hiding in a storage space behind a restaurant. The owner let me sleep on flattened cardboard boxes in exchange for washing dishes before sunrise. They didn't ask my name. I didn't ask theirs. But the first time I touched hot water from a tap, I nearly dropped the pan I was holding. That night, they brought me a bowl of noodle soup. I had eaten noodles before, of course. But these had meat, real meat, and scallions, and something else I hadn't tasted in years, flavor. I stared at the steam rising from the bowl for a long time before taking the first sip. I don't know why, but I cried while eating it. Not loudly, just a slow stream of tears, falling into broth I didn't deserve. Eventually, I made contact with a local broker who specialized in smuggling North Koreans into safe houses. It cost more than I had, but someone had already paid for me. I still don't know who. They brought me to the border checkpoint, disguised as a delivery assistant. I wore a cap, pulled low over my eyes, and carried heavy boxes without looking up. My heart slammed against my ribs with every beep of the scanner. But no one stopped me. I passed through. When we reached South Korea, I expected celebration. Instead, there was paperwork. Doctors. Long interviews. I was brought to a place called Hanawon, where they taught us how to live again, how to use a phone, how to read labels, how to speak without whispering. They told me I was safe now. Safe. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like starting over as a child who had forgotten how to trust his own voice. At night, I lay in a clean bed under soft sheets, staring at the ceiling, wondering what freedom was supposed to feel like. It's been over a year now. I live in a small apartment in the outskirts of Seoul. It's quiet here. The neighbors don't ask questions, and I don't offer answers. I work part-time at an electronics repair shop. Radios, mostly. Old ones. People bring them in, even though they're outdated, just for the nostalgia. I don't mind. I like the silence between the circuits. The government gave me a new name, a new ID, a second chance. But the ghosts didn't stay behind in the river. They crossed with me. Some nights, I wake up drenched in sweat, certain that someone is knocking on my door. Other nights, I lie awake with the lights off, listening not for voices or soldiers but for the sound of a frequency that doesn't belong. I've thought about speaking publicly, about telling the world what I heard, what I saw. But I know how people respond to things they can't verify. Without proof, it becomes rumor, conspiracy, fantasy. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point all along. One afternoon, a brown envelope arrived at my door. No return address, no stamps, just my new name, printed neatly in Hangul. Inside was a USB drive. No label. I waited a full day before plugging it in. It contained a single audio file barely 20 seconds long. I played it once. It was distorted, buried in static. But I recognized the pulse. The same rhythm. The same frequency signature. And then, just as I was about to close the file, a whisper cut through. Still here, still waiting. I sat there for hours after that, staring at the screen. I don't know who sent it. I don't know what it means. But I do know this. Someone is still out there. Still calling. Still trapped. And I'm still listening. Freedom is not a finish line. It's a burden. A responsibility. It demands more than escape. It demands memory. The ability to look back and not turn away. I may have crossed the river, but I carry the sound of that signal with me. And I always will.